Doctors and nurses of Reddit, what is the funniest thing you've heard when a patient was on anesthesia but you couldn't laugh? I have epilepsy and we have a fugue state after our seizures where we're confused and loopy, but it's also blacked out in our heads, so I don't remember this at all. Apparently, in the ambulance after the seizure I was singing Britney Spears' Oops I Did It Again in reference to seizing again. The EMTs found it so funny that they made sure to tell me about it once I was in the hospital and awake enough to remember. Then a few weeks later I got a package with a Britney Spears CD in it and a post-it note saying seize the moment. But seriously, take your medicine. When sending my patient to sleep, we were giving the Drugas via the IV. He said you'll have to give me lots of that stuff, referring to the Drugas. Worried I said why? Thinking he an undisclosed allergy or condition we hadn't known about. Instead he said as he fell asleep because I smoke weed. Difficult to keep a straight face. When I had surgery on my ankle, I apparently got my DR to laugh, and some of the nurses after the surgery to laugh. So, they gave me a shot of something to numb me up or do something important before they actually put me to sleep. I remember at the point where they gave me a second shot. After the second shot, my DR told me to count backwards from 10. Apparently I just looked at him and said no need, and passed the duck out. After the surgery when I was waking up, but still pretty out of it, the nurses brought my dad back to help get me ready to go. When I saw him, I yelled, "You're not my mom." To which he replied, "I'm your dad, dumbass." Apparently that was the best thing the nurses had heard all day. I was getting a hysterectomy, and apparently right after the Drugas started kicking in, I loudly proclaimed to the nurse that I named my cervix. She asked the name, and I slurred cervix a lot and passed out. I wonder if she laughed, or if she just rolled her eyes. I'm glad I didn't die on the operating table, because those would be my last words. Yikes. Not a DR, but a patient coming out of post-surgical haze. And there was this woman moaning and carrying on really loudly. Quiet for a moment or two. Then I asked the nurse to shut her up because she was really bothering me, only to be told it was me making that god-awful racket. Not a doctor nor a nurse. But when my father went under for the removal of several teeth, he woke up, he revealed an almost encyclopedic knowledge of bridges, which he revealed to the cab driver. I have never heard of him talking about them before or after, but he was confident enough to name his top 10 bridges and their engineers. I once went in for a day surgery operation on my knee and I knew my then girlfriend's mum worked on the day ward. The catch was she didn't know we were dating. Cut to me waking up in recovery after the op and there was a nurse standing next to my bed who asked what was it. She wasn't allowed to find out. Turns out I'd been saying Julie who works here can't find out what we're doing. Thankfully there was more than one Julie on the ward, so I just mumbled I had no idea and must have been talking nonsense. Nurse in the ER. We do conscious sedations for broken bones or chest tubes and stuff. We make sure to remove all family from the room prior to sedating because patients really do say some pretty bad stuff. One was a kid who came out to all the staff and he had never told anyone before. The other was a woman who talked about the sexual troubles with her husband and how they were having marital troubles. After getting my wisdom teeth taken out, the nurse waiting for me to wake up told my mom that when I opened my eyes I sat up immediately and asked for my teeth. I asked the doc prior if I could keep them and he said he'd leave them in a baggie, so she was going to give it to me anyway. Mayo was brought out to a waiting area so she could have my mom come get me. I guess someone else was there and I very proudly showed this stranger my bagged teeth. Then passed out again. She told my mom it wasn't uncommon for people to ask if they can keep their teeth, but she'd never seen someone be that desperate to have them. She also made it a point to say I kept putting the baggie up to my face and getting a very serene smile. Lol. Not a doctor or a nurse, but was a patient. I had a few surgeries in my teens. I went to a children's hospital, up to 18 years old, for the surgeries. I always remembering waking up in a recovery room full of crying kids. Apparently one time I woke up sedated to high heaven and told a nurse to tell those kids to shut the duck up. I'm trying to sleep. Apparently everyone thought it was hysterical. My nickname from then on was Sleeping Beauty. Not me but my so. When he was F2, he was helping demonstrate insertion of an endoscope for a colonoscopy on an elderly lady for some undergrad med students. She was anesthetized and, as the camera went in, she said, "Oh, Harold, not tonight. You know I don't like it in there." All the med students were a little stunned at first, but he just burst out laughing and they joined in. I was taking care of a nurse from another specialty. She had to go under general anesthesia and went off for 30 minutes about how we have all of the good drugs in land. Fentanyl is the best shit ever. etc. I definitely told her all about it when she fully came out of it. Professional courtesy and stuff. I woke up at the end of getting my wisdom teeth pulled out. And I was high as a kite. He had one more tooth to pull out and said it might hurt. And I just yelled, "I ain't no itch." The nurse couldn't keep it together. Last surgery I had. Right as they pushed the needle of the good stuff, I asked the entire theater if anyone needed anything while I was out. They laughed. I passed out into oblivion. Surgeon here. I had a patient try to munch through the surgical drape that separates anesthesia from surgical side to create a peephole, while mumbling on how he was curious what was happening on the other side. He was also hitting on an older scrub nurse with no bullshit attitude. It was hysterical. Propofol is hell of a drug. My wisdom teeth extraction. I woke up crying and the doctor nurses were really concerned, until I told them I was crying because I missed my wisdom teeth. They enjoyed that one. I then proceeded to point at the light switch and ask them to turn the radio on. And ask the nurse if the doctor was a good guy because I wanted to invite him to my birthday party. I was probably 16. I'll preface this by saying that I don't like hospitals, especially when I'm the patient. I went in for a colonoscopy and was given propofol and whatever for pain. I'm a complete drug wimp, so fell asleep in about 2 seconds. When it was over, I was being taken to recovery and I kind of woke up. I said, "Am I done? Can I go home?" And the nurse said, "You can't go home until you pass gas so that we know all of the air is out of your intestines." I thought, right then. And as I was being wheeled into the little recovery bay, with curtains, not walls, I pushed as hard as I could. Simultaneously my husband stood up and said, "Hey. Bah," and I farted so loudly and for so long that I almost launched myself into the next room. I heard my husband bellow, "Jesus Christ." And then I heard some laughter from somewhere else. I said, "I'm ready to go home," and passed back out while my husband stood there looking around in confusion about what had just happened. I've never heard the end of this. First, not a doctor yet. Second, everyone in the room laughed, including the patient after we told him later. But I like this story. I was working in the ER when a man came in with a dislocated shoulder. He said he was riding a mule and it threw him off into a tree. Later he was given twilight sedation and the doctor pops his shoulder back in. While he's coming to, he says, "Does anyone here want to buy a mule? I've got one and I don't really want it anymore." It was especially funny because he was totally serious. Hi. But serious. Not a doctor or nurse, but my own experience. While sedated for wisdom teeth, I apparently kicked a nurse in the gut who had grabbed my ankle to keep me from twitching. When I woke up I asked this same nurse to take a selfie with me before I knew I kicked her. She didn't tell me until after the selfie. I have a picture to commemorate the time I assaulted a nurse. The last 2 sedations I've had, surgery and colonoscopy, I've woken up to be the nicest person in the world apparently. I would wave at anyone who would walk by the bed and tell them that I hope that they would have a nice day and would compliment everyone. I kept forgetting to breathe though, so they needed someone by my bed to remind me to breathe. I just remember waking up to someone nonchalantly going, "Boop. Take another breath again." My husband had to have an upper GI endoscopy done a few months ago. He woke straight up by all appearances. Had a serious detailed conversation with the physician about the results and walked out under his own steam. Even offered to drive us. He decided he really wanted Chinese food. Not delivery or takeout. It had to be buffet. Apparently the drugas hadn't actually worn off. Because he came to in the buffet. As far as he's concerned. He passed out in the DRS office and woke up in front of a heaping pile of beef teriyaki. When my wife was getting a colonoscopy, there was this huge dude also in recovery. This dude made Michael Clark Duncan look like a 98-pound weakling. Anyways, he's half loopy from the anesthesia and says in a very kid-like voice, "My tummy has a viewy bad ouchie." He kept repeating it for like 10 minutes and I'm thinking that if I laugh he'll remember after recovering and turn me into something resembling chunky salsa without breaking a sweat. When I had a minor surgery on my hand, I remember being pretty hungry before going under. While I was out, I dreamt of burritos and tacos. The surgeon informed me that I was describing my perfect Taco Bell order in slurs and mumbles almost the whole time. Not a doctor but my own experience. Woke up and started screaming my lungs hurt. In English. Heard everyone laughing. No one could understand me because I live in Brazil. Then proceeded to tell them, in Portuguese, that I couldn't see anything. Naturally the nurses were scared that I had gone blind. Only for me to follow with, "I need my glasses." When I had to get a cyst removed from my wrist and was in the recovery room, apparently I was holding hands with my wife and said, "Your hands are so cold." "Must be all that ice I bought you," and I pointed to her wedding ring. I don't remember it at all. But she told me the nurse thought it was hilarious. Not a doctor or nurse. But I've gone under a couple of times. The one I remember is when I had my colonoscopy. I told the doctor. I made sure it was nice back there. "I got my ass crack waxed for you." To be fair, I had gotten a Brazilian 2 days earlier. But that wasn't the reason. I'm also pretty sure that he saw his share of hairy ass cracks. After I got my wisdom teeth taken out, I decided to play some music. I must have pressed play and lost focus and then remembered what I was doing after the first song had ended. The second song began playing, but I began singing the first song because in my mind, I just pressed play. That must have been the worst round some poor nurse had ever heard. My husband had his wisdom teeth out, and while under sedation he told the DR and the nursing staff that he couldn't wait to get me home and into bed. Rather explicitly. It was hilarious. Also, the dentist had the same name as a famous male porn star. I was waiting for him to make a joke about that, but he was shuffled out pretty quick once he started talking about our sex life. I'm not in medicine. When my sister had her wisdom teeth removed, she had general anesthesia. She woke up and asked the doctor for her teeth so she could give them to the tooth fairy. When I had mine done, I reportedly didn't do anything stupid. However, my mom left me in a locked car in the pharmacy parking lot while I was still not quite conscious. That was a terrifying way to wake up. Not a doctor or a nurse. Don't even play one on TV. I had to have an emergency C-section. As the anesthesiologists were trying to decide if I needed a general or local, I told them general. I did not want to be there. Somebody cutting my body open and pulling out another human? No. Hard pass. When I woke up in recovery, the first thing I asked was how big? Meaning, of course. How big was the baby? The nurse said that they weren't sure yet. The scales in NICU didn't go that high. But they thought around 10-11 pounds. 11 pounds 10 ounces was the final tally. My response. Husband vasectomy, rusty knife. I remember hearing laughter as I drifted off again. But in that moment, I was dead serious. Went to see a PT who was mellowed on anxiolytics. He introduced himself as the Lord's busy and sent me to do his work. He then said, "I'm watching you," before proceeding to poke himself in the eyes trying to do the hand gesture. He then started crying vividly, stating, "I have seen the face of God. And he is crying." A massive look of shock and surprise overwhelmed him, followed by "I'm crying. I must be God," before he started yelling help. Clapping vividly. The community nurse, her student and the OT with me started laughing hysterically. Before he started singing happy birthday to the student. Not a doc. But I was put under for a routine operation a few months back. I woke up and remembered talking to my GF while taking pictures of the instruments inside the medical room. I work with equipment like it sometimes, so I wanted to take some picture for reference. I remember taking the pictures. I have the pictures on the phone. But I was there alone. GF was at work. When I went back for a checkup, the doc could barely hold his laughter in and had a smirk so big. I still don't know what I did or said and who was in the room with me. Not a doctor. But when I was getting a completely dislocated shoulder reset, I turned to the ER staff and delivered this gem. Interstellar is the best film. And it remains the best film of the past decade. Duck the Revenant. Interstellar's where it's at. Med student here, and I have a really good one. It was at the end of a procedure, and as the patient is waking up, still dazed obviously, he just instinctively starts trying to jerk off his flaccid big dick. At first the women in the OR all thought he was just trying to go to the bathroom, but the guys all knew exactly what was going on. Everyone just kinda tried to look away and stifle their laughter. I just remember the medical fellow was teaching me something, as I am directly in the line of sight of this.